It's going to be a lot easier to go from here to a million. I really thought we'd see probably between like 225 to 285,000 on this next cycle. Bitcoin's going to a million a coin this 25. It's possible. I'd have to say that everything changed on election day. A lot of Bitcoiners are still sleeping on this. I'm 90% certain that within 48 hours of him taking office, we're going to see an executive order signed creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve. You know, you don't have enough Bitcoin right now. We're going to continue. And when we cross that chasm, again, stand the F by, because we are going to take off. You can create generational wealth. You can change your family's trajectory completely by stacking as much Bitcoin as you can get. On the 25th, on Christmas Day, the Russian finance minister on national television said he confirmed that Russia is already settling global trade using Bitcoin. I just don't think people understand how fast this can happen. When you say things happen suddenly, that sudden part, it just takes people by surprise. $10,000, if you took it forward 20 years, it's $64 million.
Hi, George. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
Oh, it's going great. I'm glad that we had a chance to talk again. It's been a little while since I've seen you, and there are a lot of really exciting things that are going on right now. You know, I don't think people are bullish enough. I still don't understand, but for some reason, people just seem to be kind of asleep at the wheel with what's happening here in the next 18 days. And that's, you know, in 18 days, President-elect Trump is going to put his hand on the Bible, become President Trump. And he's given us some indications that we're going to see some massive changes going forward in the Bitcoin space, and for Bitcoin too, and for the country.
Absolutely. And when this comes out, it's probably just 2 weeks to that, because I think it's 20th of January, I think is the inauguration.
Right. That's correct.
So today we are recording at, 4th of January. So like next week will be only 2 weeks to there. It's also interesting for me how outside of the Bitcoin world, nobody cares about that 100K milestone. I thought it will be bigger.
You know, the thing is, I mean, for those of us who've been in the space for a while, we've all been waiting for the 100K. But at the same time, you know, I felt like in our last cycle that we went prematurely, that we were cut short in our cycle peak. You know, there were a lot of things that were going on. I didn't understand how important FASB reporting was. You know, that's changed now. The accounting rules for Bitcoin on a treasury company's balance has been changed from intangible asset to fair market value. So even though MicroStrategy came into the space in 20, and we were all excited about it, we thought the institutions were arriving. I mean, I was wrong. I actually said institutions are coming. Totally wrong. They did not arrive. FASB was one of the reasons, but there were other things going on too. For instance, I didn't understand how important choke point 2.0 was in restricting capital access for companies that were trying to enter the space. I mean, the Biden administration really doubled down on that from choke point 1.0, and it's just made a big difference in I think the outcome in the 21 cycle. And then last but not least, you know, the GBTC premium that went to a discount, that probably was the single biggest change in our space. And with all of those, and the fact that the rise was so rapid up there, I think we just ran out of steam. But I was surprised. I really thought it would go higher. I thought we'd see 100K last time. So now I just think maybe it's like we're making up for lost time, and maybe people just expect this. I'll tell you one thing. It's going to be a lot easier to go from here to a million. You'll see. I mean, that's only a 10x, and Bitcoin does that.
So yeah. So you're saying it's easier to go from 100K to a million than from like 10K or some like smaller amount from there?
It's going to get easier and easier as time goes by, based upon liquidity and how big our market cap is. You know, when we get to a 5-6 trillion market cap, that's going to be massive, because it's going to allow, you know, right now, institutions are with us. I mean, we set up the tripwires. Flares are in the air. They're inside the perimeter. The enemy is inside here with us now. Institutions, big companies are here. But it's nothing compared to what we're going to see from the wirehouses and asset allocators once our market cap gets big enough. So even though it's 2 million or 2 trillion, it's really not as big as it needs to be to accelerate where we're going to go. But it's happening. It's going to happen.
I'm looking really a lot forward to the gold flipping moment where we kind of catch up to the gold market cap. It's hard to say what price that will be because gold is also appreciating against the US dollar at the same moment. It's like a moving target. Is that a meaningful when Bitcoin is finally the biggest asset in the world? Now we're like number 8 or something like that.
It's huge. It's just huge. I mean, and look at silver. You know, silver's been around for thousands of years, and we are past silver's market cap. It's going to happen with gold. You know, I've held gold in the past. I like gold. I've held gold ETFs, gold miners. I recently, within a year and a half ago, I liquidated all the gold that I had left. Everything's in Bitcoin now, and in fact, all my wealth is in Bitcoin or a proxy, MicroStrategy for Bitcoin. But otherwise, I'm all in Bitcoin. But what I was going to say is, getting back to your question there, you know, if you look at the history of gold, and I know Bitcoiners will appreciate this, and hopefully we won't have any of them out there throwing rocks at gold people, because, you know, it's so weird that we've got this antipathy between gold and Bitcoin. And when you think about it, real gold bugs, the people that really believe in sound money and believe that gold was an alternative to fiat, these people are really Bitcoiners. I mean, they're Bitcoiners. They just don't know it yet. And I think when we see people like Peter Schiff, they're so disingenuous and they've done so much damage that it gets Bitcoiners really fired up. And they don't understand the history of gold. You know, if you look at, well, if you look at gold, let's just take a moment here. Before we get going here with anything else, let's just take a moment at gold, because we are going to flip gold. I mean, that is going to happen. It's an $18 trillion market. You know, when you start looking at the global markets, you've got 300 in real estate, 300 or 330 probably in real estate, 300 in bonds, fixed income. You've got about 115, 120 trillion in equities. You've got 18 in gold, 18 in art, a bunch of other little shit like collectible cars, you know, things of that nature, maybe $6 trillion. And so there's so much market cap out there that we haven't even touched yet. And everybody talks about this, so I won't stay focused on that. But maybe in our discussion, we can talk a little bit more about the history of gold and why Bitcoin is going to, and it's kind of coupled with the SVR discussion. We're going to flip gold, and it's going to be part of like a reserve currency basket, if you will.
It's also interesting. Was it Seyr recently even on an interview where he basically advertised for the Federal Reserve to buy Bitcoin for their balance? I'm not sure. I think I heard something along those lines. But yeah, it's really interesting when you think about Bitcoin as the new reserve for central banks and for companies and for everything. It's kind of, are we now officially in the bull market? Is the bull market now finally starting off with maybe the strategic Bitcoin reserve, with the 100K, with all the things that are going on?
Well, I think I follow several people. I follow several models. I don't know if you're familiar with Cena's model with 21st Capital, the quantile model. I follow Power Law model. And there are a lot of detractors to that model, but I think it's just basically a lot of people don't understand the math that's behind the Power Law. It's actually a good model. Just as an aside, I'm probably going to screw up this guy's name. His name's Darren Acemoglu. I'm sorry, Darren, I probably did screw up her name. But anyway, Darren, and he gave a lecture at MIT in 2009, and he tied together why power laws work with networks. And we're a network. I mean, you and me, we're in a network here. And he later went on to win the Nobel Prize. I can't remember what it was for. But anyway, there's good math behind that model. And then the other thing is there's several other people I follow. James Check, James, and Checkmate at Twitter or X, and I follow his information. We do have some air below us right now, this market, meaning if we had a significant correction down like into the 80s, it wouldn't surprise me, but that doesn't mean that has nothing to do with the bull market. We are in the bull market. I'd have to say we're approaching the euphoria phase and that this is going to continue. The next 12 months, next 18 months are going to be eye-watering, I think, with what we see.
What do you expect in for 2025? We are right at the start of 2025, so we have full 12 months in front of us, and all the things are just happened with the 100K, with Trump, the inauguration, and all the things that are going on. What do you expect for the next year?
My original, based upon a lot of the analysis that I do and on chain, I really thought we'd see probably between like 225 to 285,000 on this next cycle, and that it would follow the 4-year cycles. But when you really just step back for a minute and zoom out, I'd have to say that everything changed on election day. I did not expect the election to go the way it did so dramatically. President-elect Trump won 7 out of the 7 swing states. Popular vote. That's unheard of. And, the fact that they carried the Senate and have a slim majority in the House, I didn't expect that. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners, I think that's what it is. A lot of Bitcoiners are still sleeping on this because, and I know that TradFi is, I know that the people out there in the real world that not like nuts like you and me, they're sleeping. I mean, they really don't understand what's going on. President Trump, he's been very clear about this. And what I mean is, even before he went to Nashville, he had already told us, he had already given us an indication of where this was going to go with Bitcoin. I think the reason that he went to Nashville was because of both his sons and also his younger son, Barron. I think that they discussed this with him. And the reason I say that is if you listen to Nick Bhatia recently with Marty Bent, Nick gave reference to, I can't remember the new chief economic advisor for President Trump. And he's obviously very close to the family. I mean, it will be their chief economic advisor. And apparently, Nick said that he discussed with Nick how President Trump is going to feel about Bitcoin. He said it is part of the recipe for this country's success. Additionally, if you remember, in June, he made that comment, and it sounded kind of silly at the time. People almost pushed back against it because he said, we're going to make all the Bitcoin, meaning we're going to be mining all the Bitcoin. Do you remember that? Do you remember that comment? And of course, a lot of people said, well, that's dumb. You can't be doing that. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, if this SBR is signed in by executive order, this country, our country, the United States of America, is going to at some time be a sovereign nation that is mining Bitcoin. We're going to start mining Bitcoin. Did you see, I know I'm kind of zooming around here and getting off track a little bit, but again, it's because people just aren't bullish enough. We are going to, as a nation, eventually, we're going to have block space. We must have it. And we, at some point, are going to be mining Bitcoin, not because we need any more Bitcoin. We're going to buy all the damn Bitcoin we want if that's what we want. I'm 90% certain that within 48 hours of him taking office, we're going to see an executive order signed creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve. They'll probably take the 198,000 that we have left, seized from Bitfinex and the Silk Road, and that's going to be the base. Whether Senator Lummis's bill, the Bitcoin Act, gets through Congress. Congress just started today or yesterday. They're in session now. But she doesn't have a co-sponsor on that bill from the other side of the party, the Democrats. So I'm not sure if that's going to pass, but just President Trump signing that bill is going to start the process. And then you better stand the fuck by because it's going to be eye-watering after that.
It's like last year we had in January the ETF approval. And this year, the big story is that we have Trump coming with a strategic Bitcoin reserve, which is, I would argue, an even bigger step towards the hyper Bitcoinization. One interesting point that you also mentioned is, and I recently talked about that on the podcast with Bob Burnett, which is the controlling of the hash rate and how important that is.
Absolutely.
That's an amazing topic.
I'm telling you right now. So what I was going to talk about also in coupling with this whole discussion, because trust me, you don't know where this is going yet. Maybe you do, but there are very few people understand this. Bob Burnett, he started me down this rabbit hole. Just yesterday, it came out that Oman says, the Sultanate, that they're going to start mining more Bitcoin. They want to get 7% of the world's hash rate. Now, what that means is they're going to be able to guarantee themselves about 10 blocks a day. Now, just imagine, just think about this for a minute. So let's just say that the United States sets up a strategic Bitcoin reserve. That is going to be the starting pistol for more and more nations adopting Bitcoin, whether it's on the sly, which I think it's already occurred. You know, back in November, that first weekend, it was November 9th, that Saturday and Sunday, there was a very significant different type of buying that was going on in that period. It was like an agnostic to price buyer. So it means like somebody who had big pockets and really didn't give a shit what the price was. And I say that because, you know, MicroStrategy, when they go out and they purchase, they're trying to not move the market. They don't want that slippage as they're buying all of these Bitcoin. They're using something called dark pools, probably, you know, private ventures with significant capital in there. They're using either time-weighted purchases or VWAP. They're doing everything they can with algos to try and not move that price. But whoever was buying them really didn't give a damn. And when you have somebody buying agnostic to price, it's either a nation state or it's somebody so wealthy, they really just don't care. They just want, get me the Bitcoin. And imagine, let's just, you know, just picture where this is going. Let's look at the hash rate, where it comes from right now. The US has about 30% of the hash rate in the world right now. And remember, hash rate equals blocks. And if you don't own a block, let's say you want to do something with your Bitcoin, you're never going to do it if you can't get it into that block, ever. So right now, China, because the top 4 out of the 6 mining pools are Chinese, they have 40% of the hash rate. And Russia's got about 11% of hash rate right now that is coming from Russia. You know, Bhutan, there's a nation that's been mining Bitcoin, and they're becoming more and more wealthy, but they've only got about 1/3% of the hash rate, and they're going to increase it to the point where they might be able to get like half a block, like 1 block every other day. So there's going to be a race. It's a war that's coming for this block space, and we're going to be right in the middle of it. And when President Trump said we need to be mining all the Bitcoin, a lot of people laughed, but I didn't. I thought, you know, I don't think he understands Bitcoin at that level, but maybe he's just cunning or understands that we need to control those blocks. Because here's another thing that he was heard saying. I mentioned this not too long ago, but I don't know if you ever saw that podcast. It was a long time. It was back in January last year. And it was Peter McCormick and Danny was there. And it had Preston Pish and Luke Groman. And they were on there. And Peter McCormick and Danny brought up the fact that President Trump had been, while people were talking to him about Bitcoin, he had been overheard on the phone saying, Bitcoin is the new oil. Now, I don't know. Just think about what I just said there. Again, I don't know what his thought process is here, but if he actually is thinking that, knowing the history of the dollar and the petrodollar, from the mid 70s. And I'm sure you're familiar with the petrodollar. Well, if he is somehow referencing that too, that's a deeper level also.
It's interesting. It's like we know Eric Trump has a good understanding of it. Yeah.
You know what, you just brought up exactly what I was thinking, because I don't know, you were at MENA, you were there for the speech. Did you listen to Eric Trump's speech?
I listened actually only to his speech he gave in the VIP area and not on the main stage. I just saw the clip where he said Bitcoin is going to 1 million. And my thought is like, if he says it's going to 1 million, he probably thinks more about like 10 million, but he cannot say 10 million because then people will call him crazy and he still has to win elections and stuff like that. But him saying 1 million, that's huge.
Well, before we go any farther, I'm so glad you brought up the word crazy, because we need to tell people who I am. First off, anything I say today, it's not financial advice. Just consider me. Well, I'll tell you who I am. I was kicked out of high school, and then I didn't go back. So I'm a high school dropout. I went to college and I dropped out. So I dropped out of college too. And then I started working in the oil fields. So I'm an ex-oil field worker. Then I became I'm an ex-cop, and I worked underground after that. I drifted south into Colorado after a couple of years, and I started working underground as a miner, not a Bitcoin. Hey, I wanted to show you something. You see that painting that's behind me?
The one that's got the flashing? The Dorian Nakamoto one, right?
Yeah, the CEO of Bitcoin. Do you know that painting is mining Bitcoin?
The flashy lights?
That painting is actually mining Bitcoin. So while we're broadcasting right now, and when people view this, I'm mining Bitcoin with my painting that I made. And now if we win a block, I want you to know something. I'm probably going to this is probably going to go short, our interview. I'm going to go over. I got a thing of whiskey here. I'm going to pour myself a big shot of whiskey, and then you won't see me again. So, but anyway, just as an aside, talking about MENA. Well, so I listened to the entire speech, and then I played a couple of the highlights there. But I want to tell you something. Eric Trump said something on stage that I can't believe more people didn't like highlight or pick up on. He said, "I've known Michael Seyr for 20 years."
Interesting.
And I thought to myself, oh my God, can you imagine? Okay, just picture yourself. You're like 25 or something. Just picture though, like, let's say you're an old fart like me. Imagine I'm 20 years ago and I meet Michael Seyr, and I meet him once in a while, and I have his ear, or I should say the Trump family has Michael Saylor's ear, because you saw what Eric Trump just put out 2 days ago.
That is photo at Mar-a-Lago, yeah.
And what did he say what was their joint passion?
Yeah, it was like two friends, one passion with Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. His passion is Bitcoin. Now imagine Michael Seyr for 20 years. And what do you think about Barron, if Nick Bhatia, if those comments are correct? And they came from Stephen Miron, I think is the gentleman's name. He will be the chief economic advisor for President Trump. So imagine that if these people had the ear of Michael Seyr over, I don't know, this last period. And, let me say another thing too. Why do you think Michael Seyr is just hell-bent on buying as much Bitcoin, almost like a drunken sailor right now?
It's like there was this one tweet who put it out pretty short or something like that, where like Seyr probably knows something that we all don't know, and he's betting really big on it, and he is invited to Mar-a-Lago to Eric Trump, and he knows probably way more than we do.
So, and I didn't finish, by the way, for people out there that wonder what the hell I was talking about with background. So I ended up working underground as a miner in the bottoms of I worked down between 1 mile and 2 miles down under the earth, and it sucked down there. My life just was a mess. Then I went back to college. I ended up getting into the Navy as a fighter pilot. I flew F-18s, Hornets in the Navy, which is the same plane that they used in Top Gun. And then I did go through Top Gun and became a Top Gun adversary instructor, which is why I can wear the hat and say, hey, I earned it. I earned it the hard way. So, and then after that, I flew for Delta, was a captain with them, flew international all over the world. And unfortunately, I had a traumatic brain injury at one point. And that's another reason why you should not pay attention to what I'm saying. But, and you know, I shouldn't laugh about that because, you know, having gone through that, and that was about 10 years ago, and to see what it's like, I have so much more empathy for all the troops and all the people that have experienced that in combat operations overseas. I did not understand how devastating that was. So, but the bottom line is, for anybody out there, I don't have any background in finance. These are just my thoughts. I do a lot of research, a lot of study. I've screwed up a lot of stuff in life, but Bitcoin, I think Bitcoin and, well, Bitcoin's my winning strategy. I'm set with Bitcoin. So.
It's really interesting. And by the way, I think in our first interview, and I just want to show this quickly to people, we talked a little bit more about your background in the beginning, so people can check that out. This was also a really good interview and maybe a basis to what we are talking here if people didn't see it. And this is the image that we were talking about with Seyr and Eric Trump at Mar-a-Lago. That's huge. Yeah, like and I was like, oh, like is there some personal connection there? Is super interesting to see.
And then, you know, continuing that conversation though about why I think people aren't bullish enough or excited enough. You don't have enough Bitcoin right now. I mean, you just don't. Unless you're me. The only reason I can say I've got enough Bitcoin is because I'm broke. I mean, I'm broke. I don't have any more money to put into Bitcoin. I have enough Bitcoin. You know, just look at the people that they're going to draft into the administration. You've got Scott Bessent. You know, if you've looked at his background, he is both himself, the Commerce Secretary, and the new czar, the crypto czar. None of them are academics. They're not Janet Yellen. You know, he will be the Secretary of the Treasury. These are people that have got boots on the ground that have done the hard work in the real world, and they understand how it works. And I've looked up Scott Bessent's comments. I can't find anything negative about Bitcoin, not a single word. And in fact, I just think he's going to be a breath of fresh air. Then let's talk about Paul Atkins. Same thing. You know, he's already got background in the SEC as a commissioner, appointed during Bush. Sharp guy. He's into less regulation. He also is into, and as mentioned, that he is in less regulation for electronic or digital assets. And then look at the crypto czar, this guy that's coming in there. What is his name? David Sachs. So look at him for just a minute. You know, he's gotten a lot of pushback from the Bitcoin community because he's got shitcoins in his background. But you know what? He's a sharp guy. And again, you look up his comments. I can't find a single negative comment about Bitcoin. In fact, listen, this is a guy who once said, Bitcoin can separate money from state. He's bought Bitcoin in 2013 at $130 a coin. I think that we're giving short shift to these guys, some of these players that are coming into the space. And they've met, you've seen the pictures of Senator Lummis with Bessent and Paul Atkins in her office discussing the SBR. So again, let's just go back to the premise here. The SBR, in my mind, is going to happen. And you've got to be prepared for that. I don't know where things are going in the future. I have no crystal ball. I follow all these models, but do you know a funny thing about models is that all models are trying to use historical trends to somehow project the future. That one model I mentioned, the power law, if you take a regression analysis and you're not drawing a line, the math draws a line. If you take regression analysis, it's accurate within like 95 to 97%, meaning at any point in there, that price is falling within that deviation. But all of I've built my premises on the idea of a 4-year cycle. And before the election, I was thinking that a 4-year cycle is going to continue. I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like we're in uncharted territory. Like what we're going to see after January 20th means that Bitcoin could go anywhere. Samson Mao is probably about the only person that's more bullish than I am. And if he were in the studio, if he were back there looking at the painting, the CEO painting, and talking to me, and we were yakking, and he said, well, Bitcoin's going to $1 million a coin this 25. I wouldn't laugh at him. I wouldn't say, you're an idiot. I'd just say, you know what? It's possible. It is possible. And I don't know what the plan, I don't know how hard they're going to push for this SBR. I know if they set aside the coins that they have and then make a commitment to purchase coins, that it's going to cause a tremendous response across the planet. Again, I think that sovereign nations are already stockpiling Bitcoin. I believe that we'll find out more about that within the next 2 to 3 months, and we'll probably have names. I think that countries are already understanding what you brought up. You brought it up, that the idea of blocks, controlling block space, hash rate, it's so important. And so all of these races are going to start. The gun's been fired. We're on our way. And nobody knows what's going to happen in this next cycle, including myself.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. Absolutely. And this, I also imagine this huge event happening, maybe similar to the .com bubble run when just everything went up. And we might have a similar event in Bitcoin and crypto, where then afterwards Bitcoin kind of continues and some of the altcoins might die. I don't know about that. But I could imagine kind of like a catalyst event for that. And honestly, last year with ETF and now with the strategic Bitcoin reserve, if I had to bet on a year where this could happen, 2025, maybe, I don't know when it will happen, but I'm almost certain that we will have some catalyst event where on all the price charts, the developments till now look like a flat line. And then this year, 2025, I don't know, maybe 2028 will just look like a straight line up. I imagine like that with my limited life experiences with 26.
You know, that's interesting that, yeah, because if you look at, you remember I mentioned the fact that, that Bitcoin's a network. And if you look at networks, how do we value it? We use Metcalfe's law. And Metcalfe's law just says that the value of a network is proportional to the square of the users, or the users squared. So it's exponential. And think about that for a minute. Two people in the network with Bitcoin, it's like a power of 4, if you will, or a value of 4. But you just put a few more, you get to 10, it's 100. So it goes from 4 to 100 just by going from 2 to 10 people. Well, we're in that. That is what we're on. We are a network. You know, Bitcoin is the single greatest invention in the history of mankind, and it is expanding on this network curve. It's like an S curve. We talk about that a lot. And in my estimation, I think we're at about 5% exposure, meaning not necessarily Bitcoin fanatics like you and me, or my fellow plebs out there that are listening to this or watching it, but I'm talking about exposure to Bitcoin. So if we're at 5%, usually as you go up that S curve, when you get to about 14 to 16%, it's called crossing the chasm. And when you get to that point, you know, lots of times the S curve dies. Bitcoin's not going to die. I mean, we're done with that discussion. Bitcoin's not going to fail. That's not going to happen. So we're going to continue. And when we cross that chasm, again, stand the F by, because we are going to take off. And you are going to be left behind if you don't have Bitcoin with you. And you can create generational wealth. You can change your family's trajectory completely by stacking as much Bitcoin as you can get now.
It's also interesting because you mentioned network effects, and networks are not only between individuals, but also between nations. What do you think will happen if America now actually goes ahead and does that in January? All the other countries are watching. They are seeing what America does. They're already looking very closely, all the secret services of all the other countries. What do you imagine as EU countries, China, Russia, Dubai, the United Emirates doing?
Well, that's a deep question in a way, because it almost takes you, it almost takes you into the idea of, what is money? How do we settle international trade? Right now, if you look at, let's step back for a minute and approach it from a different way, because this is a good idea to talk about. If you look at global trade right now, the US dollar accounts for about 50% of it. It's huge. I mean, it's huge. If you look at China, they're like 4.5% of global trade. And that's because the yuan, nobody wants the yuan. Well, no, nobody wants the yuan. It's not even a freely floating currency. There's an offshore and an onshore. If they ever let it out, if they ever just let it float freely, the yuan, it'd collapse. It'd be like a balloon with a hole in it, it'd just deflate. All the populace, without those capital controls keeping them in, they'd all escape. They'd want something else. And the reason I bring this up is because look at the people that are trapped in Russia inside their currency right now. Do you think they really want to collect rubles or anything else? Do you think, if you start looking at the BRICS nation, put the BRICS together for a minute. And so let's just keep it to the 4. Look at, Brazil, Russia, India, China. So look at those 4. Let's say that they wanted to escape the dollar and settle trade, how would they go about doing it? Well, if you look at what Putin said in the middle of December, he already told us. As I mentioned, a lot of hash rates coming out of Russia. Putin said, and this was in that conference that he was speaking to all of these members, he said, who can, and remember, I'm translating from Russian, he said, who can prohibit Bitcoin, meaning who can ban Bitcoin, who can stop Bitcoin? Do you remember what he said? Nobody. Who can stop Bitcoin? Nobody. And then he went on. The second comment was about electronic payment systems and who can stop those. Nobody. And then, even more importantly, on the 25th, on Christmas Day, the Russian finance minister on national television, RT, I believe it was, said he confirmed that Russia is already settling global trade settlements using Bitcoin. I mean,
That's huge. Yeah.
it is. I just think for a minute what we're talking about. We're talking about, first off, Bitcoin is the greatest final settlement transmission that you will ever be able to get. And imagine it for nation states. What is the problem with gold? Like, for instance, those countries I just mentioned, especially Russia, India, China, what are they doing? They're stockpiling gold. They're putting gold together as quick as they can. And that's another counter to a conversation that Nick Carter started in regards to why the U.S. should not have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, that it would undermine the dollar. When these countries accumulate gold, are they doing so to undermine their currency? They're not. They're trying to strengthen their currency. Bitcoin is the same idea. Within a strategic Bitcoin reserve, it's the same idea. So imagine these countries are really searching for a way to escape the petrodollar or the SWIFT sanctions. And Russia, Russia right now only accounts for 0.2% of global trade because they're sanctioned, down tight. So again, if we just take it back to the first opening that we had here, it's that people are not bullish enough. Imagine that we're on a world stage where all these countries get it, and we are up that S curve, and we get to that chasm. Maybe it happens sooner. It's hard for all the viewers out there, if you're looking at me, it's very difficult to understand exponential growth. You think you get it, but it's impossible. Hold on just a minute. Here. So look, here's a sheet of paper. If I take this sheet of paper and I fold it over just one time like that, and remember, I'm sitting in my studio if you're watching, I fold it over again. That's 2 folds. I do it again, 3 folds. Now, you can tell that as I go, it's going to get harder and harder. So, but let's just say that I could fold that thing as much as I wanted in the studio, sitting here right now. Do you know, in 37 of those folds, when I get to fold 37, I'm going to be from here where I'm sitting in this chair. Just look up for a minute. I'm going to reach the moon, 38,000 miles. I'm going to go, that little sheet of paper that you just saw is going to go to the moon. That's exponential growth. Albert Einstein is quoted as being, he said, compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. I don't think he actually said that, but he's attributed. Everybody says he says it, so that's good enough for me. But I just don't think people understand how fast this can happen. When you say things happen suddenly, that sudden part, it just takes people by surprise.
Absolutely, and especially if now most of them are sleeping, it's fast. I was actually kind of blown away because Christmas is the time where you see a lot of the family that you don't see for a longer period of time, because the bigger family comes together and it's like 50 people, 60 people, or 40 people, something like that. And you see a lot of people that you rarely see in the year. And I was like, wow, like Bitcoin is not a topic, but they don't care. Like, they're completely asleep. They still think it's bad for the environment. They still think it's like some small asset that's a little speculative to gamble on the internet. Like, all the things that they have been said for years, it's still in their minds. It's only the people that are close to me, like mom, dad, sister, some cousins that are interacting with me more, that they get it and they are all in Bitcoin. But the further out they are, they have no idea, and it's fascinating for me to see that normal land.
Do you know one of the things that's going to change in the next year, and this is going to be a massive, is we are going to repeal those people that I mentioned earlier that are coming into the Trump administration. SOB 121 is an SEC bulletin, or a rule, I should say. All it has to do is like that be rescinded, and it's going to. And when it does, what that is, that SOB 121, it doesn't prohibit banks from having Bitcoin on their balance sheet, but it makes it so prohibitively expensive that they won't do it. When that's repealed, we are going to see so many banks flood this space. Do you remember? I don't know if you ever saw this on Bitcoin Talk Forum back in 2010. Hal Finney talked about this. He actually talked about using Bitcoin as a reserve asset on banks, and that banks would be using, tokenized assets with Bitcoin as the base layer, and that it would solve our scalability problem, be one of the methods. And it's coming. And when it comes, those banks, they're going to want to buy, sell, trade, and they're going to custody Bitcoin, custody it. And it's not going to stop. BlackRock, I think I even mentioned this maybe to you last time. Larry Fink, he wants a bank, Sob 121, prohibited. He gets an exemption over the weekend. And then New York Bank is his bank. They're all going to want this. And we are going to see so many new products coming out that are going to let you keep your Bitcoin for life. You'll never have to sell your Bitcoin. Robin, as young as you are right now, you are going to create a dynasty around you. You may not know it now, but I'm telling you, in 20 years, you're going to look back and you are going to have the Robin Seyr dynasty. And it's all going to be your family members and people that are close to you. It may be on a Fediment. You may have your own little island. Fediment would work perfect for that. And you will be a guardian yourself, maybe your wife. You're going to have kids. They're going to have grandkids. And if you know what you're doing, when those banks get in the space, Saylor's already told us this. He's talked about this several times. You're never going to sell your Bitcoin. And I know some maxis. I can see Jeff Booth right now looking at me and going, "Oh, that loser." Have you ever seen? That you're familiar with the terracotta soldiers that they dug up in China? The army of soldiers that were buried beneath the earth, and they take them around the museums and they stand there proud and tall, and it's an amazing sight to see them. Thousands of them, thousands of these clay statues buried in the earth. But what a lot of people don't know is every few thousand, there's one general. And he has a different outfit on, a different face, a different demeanor. He has a finger in a different position. He is a general. He's a thinker. He's planner. That's Jeff Booth. He's a planner. I'm just a grunt. I'm out there with my armor on. I'm just a warrior. And I'm telling you right now, I spend Bitcoin. I have no issue with that. I use Aqua Wallet. I love it. I don't mind throwing it around. I bet you just did recently in El Salvador. You probably spent some, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I was even at a conference, the unconference, where you can only buy your ticket with Bitcoin.
Same. I've done the same thing, and I don't mind doing that. I love it. So I just get a fill and spend wallet like Aqua. I put some stats in there. I spend it. And then for me, because I'm in the US, I have to worry about capital gains. But if I just fill and spend it, there is none. I don't have to worry about any of that. So it's fun. And I like supporting Bitcoin in that economy. But my Bitcoin that I have, me in a wallet, that's precious. And you know what? Look at my fist. You're going to have to pry that Bitcoin out of that fist. And I'm going to tell you something. You're looking at somebody who's gone up and down on the volatility train with Bitcoin. And I am a hardened son of a bitch. You are too. Volatility doesn't scare me at all. I'm unfazed by it. So you're not going to pry that Bitcoin loose. These people that are the TradFi people that are coming in our space, they have no idea what's coming, because there are a lot of people like you and me. And here's another thing. God, I'm all over the place today. I guess I'm just so excited about this upcoming year. But here's another thing. When I flew in the Navy, my call sign was Jethro. And the reason is my last name's Bodine. So that character is an old TV character in a stupid sitcom called Beverly Hillbillies. And Jethro Bodine was kind of an idiot. And he had to take off his shoes and count on his fingers. So my call sign was Jethro. So let's play a game and pretend I'm Jethro. And let's go over some things. Let's count how many Bitcoin are off the market right now. If this strategic Bitcoin reserve goes into full effect, it's going to be 1 million Bitcoin, 500 a day purchased for 5 years. Satoshis, 1.1 million coins, gone. Right now, the last, I just read that Bernstein, a private firm, put out an investor newsletter. They forecast that Michael Saylor, and I believe it now, Michael Saylor is going to get 1 million coins. 1 million coins, they're going to be gone. The ETFs right now, they just went over 1 million. If you take, now we were talking about countries, if you take the top 71 countries and companies, all of them combined, that's 3 million Bitcoin gone. Now, if you take the Bitcoin that are lost, we're going up. I ran out of fingers because now we're at 11 fingers. That's 11 million coins. Where are all the coins going to come from that is going to fuel this new world? And I'm not talking about that you'll never see Bitcoin sold like on exchange. You know how people sometimes talk and they'll say, there's going to be a supply shock. There won't be enough Bitcoin. There's always going to be Bitcoin for sale. You know, if you look at Saylor's law, the supply creates its own demand, and you can reverse it. Demand creates supply. That means that for every seller, there is a buyer. All they're negotiating is price. And when Bitcoin hits 400,000 a coin, there's going to be sellers. When it's 1 million a coin, there's going to be sellers. It's going to happen. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is the price, that fist, the price that it's going to take to pull that Bitcoin out of my hand. It's going to be a lot. When you think along those lines, for instance, and I know I've been going, I'll take a break in just a minute. So look at just last thing I'm going to say is look at long-term holders. Glassnode classifies them as people that have held their coins for 155 days or longer. And the reason they do that is when people get to 155 days, for some reason, they mentally switch. They kind of like they flip a switch. They are more likely to hodl. But guess what? As we went up to 73K and then 100K, long-term holders sold 1 million coins into the market. They were selling as recently as maybe last week, 30,000 coins a day. So they are selling, but these people that are selling they're not the deep long-term holders. They're like 60K people, 55K, 65K. And I'm going to tell you something. These people they're going to regret selling that Bitcoin. This next year, people are going to look back and there are going to be a lot of salty crocodile tears out there from people that sold into this market. Okay, I'll take a break.
There were a lot of things in there.
I know. I'm sorry, bud.
But it's really good. It's usually the moments in the podcast that I like the most. At least when I listen to a podcast where the guest just goes on tangent, it's really fun to see. One thing on that note, the future role of scaling Bitcoin and the future role of institutions in Bitcoin is really interesting for me. I had this discussion with a friend of mine recently where we talk, okay, when MicroStrategy has all those Bitcoin, like if they just have like 200, 300,000, that's already a lot. If they go up to 1 million, that's massive. They can be almost a central bank. Like that point, if Bitcoin is as big as it will become and they have as many Bitcoin as they have, they will be a central bank. And then when you spin that thought further, if you have, let's say, 1,000 Bitcoin or 100 Bitcoin, you will be like a smaller regional bank or even a bigger bank. And even if you have like 10 Bitcoin, you may be a smaller regional bank that are like in a town and stuff like that. How do you see that? Because we also know block space is limited. So we know not everyone will have that luxury access to the main layer. I think Bob Burnett calls it. We are used to roll around in a Rolex when we transact on the main layer, and we kind of have to get used to also second layers.
Yes, he says you and I, we're spoiled, Robin, because we like to ride around in a Rolls Royce, and he's right. I do, but you know what? We're not going to get to be on the base layer much longer as far as common interactions. It's just not going to happen. So anyway, listen, I love what you brought up there because you got it exactly right. this is over a year ago that I finally figured out in my mind where MicroStrategy was going. And it just came like I was studying, and I just suddenly, I was convicted. I thought, oh my God, he is going to become the world's largest Bitcoin bank. And I was talking to Larry Lepard. I remember talking to him about it. And oh, by the way, I got to read Larry's book. He allowed me to do a galley proof of it, to read it. It's a page turner. I mean, it's really a good book. I told him, I said, this is awesome. So it'll be out soon, probably no later than February. So anyway, getting back to MicroStrategy. So, why is that important? Well, because, and I mentioned this, I don't think I mentioned it to you before, but Michael Seyr has already told us where this is going. And, he's taking this company to a place where no one's gone before. It's like he's got us all on the boat, especially hardened investors like myself. And full disclosure to anybody that's listening, I've got a lot of MicroStrategy stock. So I'm biased. I'm probably dicked up here, but I really am a firm believer in this stock. In fact, I would have to say that I probably will never sell that MicroStrategy again. You and you can create a dynasty going forward in the next 20 years if you know how to do this right. And we can get back to that. But I call it the buy, borrow, die dynasty plan. And you can do this. You will, Robin. I'll tell you, I guarantee you're going to do it. So, but looking at MicroStrategy, I thought, he had that conversation where he was butting heads with Seyr Amus. And at the time, I kind of wondered why he was bringing up this idea of a bank. And if you remember the discussion, he was talking about kind of a bank that's large enough in a large enough country with a central bank behind it, a bank that was too big to fail. You would someday be able, and he said 10 years, you'd be able to take your money or your Bitcoin and actually lend it out to the bank. And you and I both, I'll bet you won't argue when I say that Bitcoin is the most pristine capital or collateral in the world. So if you believe that, you know that every bank is going to want that. And Michael Seyr is already going to have it. And then in that recent conversation he had with Alex Thorne, this was last month, they were in that White Hall in Saylor's house. They were discussing this. He brought up the same subject. And in the first conversation, he talked about Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. He did the same thing and the same kind of a conversation. And if you listen to his earnings call, and today is the first day after they came out with an announcement about perpetual preferred stock. I'm not going to discuss that today. It's too deep, and I probably would sound like a village idiot myself trying to get a handle on it. But I'm already doing research on that because I think that's part of their plan too. So where I'm going with this conversation is that this is going to sound silly, but JP Morgan, with $3.5 trillion under management, is going to start custodying, trading, buying, selling Bitcoin. MicroStrategy is someday going to be the world's largest Bitcoin bank. All these banks are going to want to be in this space. And what does that mean? It means that every one of these companies, just like a sovereign nation, are going to start mining Bitcoin. MicroStrategy is going to have to mine Bitcoin if they want to do what they want to do. And the reason is, again, if you don't mine the block and control the mempool template, you're never going to get your transaction in unless somebody accepts it. And I mentioned this recently. Just picture President Trump, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Senator Lummis has already told us. She says we're going to have these geographically dispersed around the country. And President Trump says we're moving, 5,000 Bitcoin to such and such in South Dakota tonight. Make it happen. He calls down to somebody or tells an aide, and the aide says, well, Mr. President, we're going to have to put it into the mempool template and hope that somebody picks up your transaction and will put a really high fee on it. President Trump's going to throw ketchup on the wall, which is kind of an old joke. And if you look it up, you'll see why. He's going to throw ketchup on the wall, and then he's going to fire whoever just told him that. And he's going to make sure that he controls the block the next day. And this is going to happen all over in our space. And the reason I'm bringing up this convoluted subject is because of that painting right behind me. Do you see that painting with that little tiny miner? This year, and last year, we started a revolution that I want to see continue in the next year. And that revolution is people like me taking a little miner like that and plugging it into your wall socket. We have miners coming out this month that can put out 2.5 terahash in just like with very little power consumption. That one back there puts out, I think, 1.5. It uses about 80 cents of electricity a month. And right now, I have it solo mining, but I'm going to point it to ocean mining. And why am I going to do that? Because if we don't want these big institutions, big banks, big brothers to come into our space and crowd us out so that we no longer have the ability to transact, we've got to start mining ourselves, all of us. And if enough plebs, we're going to have all this newfound wealth next year. So if you have newfound wealth, just buy a damn miner, plug it into a wall socket. We never used to be able to do that. It doesn't make any noise, that one. Plug it into a wall socket and start hashing. Start sending your hash somewhere with a company that is morally and ethically aligned with your values as a Bitcoiner. Because you know what? The values of the U.S. government may not align with you. JP Morgan, I guarantee you those pricks are not going to align with my morals or standards. We need to have, I think even Bob might have mentioned this. I can't remember, but we need to have 25 to 30% of the hash rate. All of us plebs, we got to own that. And we got to send it to places. The reason I'm sending it to Ocean is because I like their template that you can just plug into. It's none of this OFAC shit. I don't want to be denied my transactions because somehow my Bitcoin got intermixed with somebody that's on a OFAC list and is denied or banned. And that could happen. All right. It's another rant I got going here. I better stop. Anyway, what question do you have?
No, keep going. I like it. But yeah, I was just noting down. I love the comparison that Bob Burnett is doing with the rabbits and the horses, and I think the elephants are the big ones. And I think so too, that we need a lot more rabbits and small horses to get mining, especially the rabbits, as it's such an amazing analogy. Like you can shoot maybe one, but you never can shoot everyone because they are just running around, and it's just like 1 mile you can get so you move it really fast. And even the small horses, like if you have a small operation, you can move everything in like a day or something like that.
We'll all be little rabbits. Like we'll all have these little miners plugged in all over the damn place. And then guess what? We're safe. You know what? We'll be breeding like rabbits, and we'll be all over the damn place, and they're not going to shut us down. And so we've got to control that. That's one of the threats that we've got to address as a community. And this new wave, it's coming. I'm telling you right now, that one that puts out 2.5 terahash, I mean, that's quite a unit. It's quiet. It doesn't use much electricity. And there's more and more. It's just building faster and faster as we're sitting here right now.
And I think Block even comes out with a new miner soon. I heard about something. Maybe it's already out, but I have not heard about it. So I think it's just starting to like user-friendly, great devices that you can just plug and play and maybe configure a little bit with a nice interface. those will be out, and maybe even integrated with heating systems where you can use the heat and stuff like that. I know 21 Energy, there's an Austrian company that does that,
Yep.
where you can heat your home and mine Bitcoin with that and configure that stuff. Those use cases will be massive. Or if you have a house at home, maybe with a pool or something like that, you can heat the pool with a mining operation, and maybe you have a garage where you can set it up so the noise is not coming to the living place. So I think mining is such an underrated topic. I think it's just like a topic where everyone is like, yeah, it's running. I don't care about it, but it's really exciting the deeper you look.
Let's before I start getting off topic again, let's talk for a minute about what I said earlier about because this is a very hopeful discussion, and it's about the idea of creating generational wealth. Think about the families that you're aware of that have spanned generations and even centuries. Let's think about it for a minute. Let's go with the Rothschilds. Their bank was founded in the 1700s, and they are still today one of the wealthiest families on the planet. The Rockefellers, look at the Arnaults. You'd be familiar with those, Louis Vuitton and Hennessy, Moet. Look at the Mars family, the Koch brothers, the Vanderbilts, although they didn't do a good job in one part, which is education. These families have a something that unites them, even the royal family. And what it is that strategy I talked about. And that's not something I developed. I mean, many people know about this, buy, borrow, die. And in my case, I put on dynasty at the end, because the reason these generational wealth plans work is because people like yourself, in 20 years, you're going to have kids. You'll be approaching grandkids pretty soon. You're going to have a tremendous amount of wealth. So you are going to have a responsibility as a guardian to pass on the information that they need to have in order to keep not just their Bitcoin, but also to do something with the Bitcoin. In other words, most of these families have given back tremendous amounts in philanthropy, in charitable trusts. And in fact, trust planning is one of the reasons that they keep their wealth. But for instance, let's just look at the US for a minute. If you create tremendous amount of wealth in your Bitcoin wallet and you die, you know how normally you pay capital gains every time that you sell Bitcoin, or you have to pay taxes on it. If you die with that Bitcoin, our tax system, and this won't apply to you, but something else will in just a minute, our tax system will take that Bitcoin you have and it'll immediately, like that, mark it right back up to fair value, wherever Bitcoin's trading. Your heirs will receive it and they'll have no tax due on it. But more importantly, you don't want to spend the Bitcoin. What you really want to do, and it's going to happen with these banks, is you're going to want to borrow against that Bitcoin. As your wealth goes up and up and up, you're going to start getting to a point where you're willing to take loans out on that Bitcoin. And usually they're small. They're like 5% or less. They can be higher as it goes up, depending upon the cycle too. But what I'm talking about is you're going to take these loans out, and they'll be short term. And the next year, you'll probably take off another loan. You'll pay off the previous one. That loan is not taxed. It's just income. It's not even taxed. And even in Austria, that applies. They won't tax that. And you'll never pay taxes on it. And as you die in your country, you'll have two things. You'll have inheritance tax, and I think it's a wealth transfer tax, I think. But they're small. They're not big. And the other thing is, if you use a financial advisor, you can use a trust and charitable trust, and you'll never pay any taxes on it. Your wealth will stay intact as the years go by. It just will get bigger and bigger. And I mean, I can prove this to you. And the reason I say that this works is because of Bitcoin. It's all these families for centuries. What unites them is they all try to get the best assets they can have that will appreciate over time beyond the cost of capital, which is about, in the US, 10.8% over decades. So beyond that, so that their wealth increases. But you and I know what is the greatest performing asset over the last 15 years. It's Bitcoin. You can't beat it. If I gave you $100 million right now, and you were at Saylor's mansion recently, and you said, and I told you, I said, well, what are you going to buy? And you said, I'm going to buy Saylor's mansion. Then I would say to you, what is the next best what opportunity cost are you incurring? What's the next best alternate asset that you just passed up? And you'd think about it, and you'd say, it's Bitcoin. It's always going to be Bitcoin. So if you use Bitcoin as this base to your wealth, it's going to go up and up every year. You know, I got a lot of shit online the other day because I was trying to explain to people how compound growth works. And I used $10,000. It was like a tenth of a Bitcoin. Do you know $10,000 right now, Bitcoin over the last 5 years has returned 55%. So that $10,000 going forward, if you took it forward 20 years, and that's not long in your life, 20 years, it's $64 million. Now, a lot of people said, well, that's too high. And they might be right. Maybe I'm wrong about the last cycle being cut off early. Maybe we're not going to have a big, supernatural cycle this next time. And let's say it goes down to 40%. That's still, I think it's like $14 million. It's a lot of money. And it's just going to keep going up and up. Your kids, if they understand how this works, they're going to be even wealthier. And your family, you can give a gift to all the people you love that will go on forever with Bitcoin. And so I'm just mentioning that because I hope people understand that in the future, when these banks come around, there's going to be a lot of pushback. But eventually, we're going to want all this capital to flow into Bitcoin if we want to see Bitcoin Bitcoinization. We have to have it. If we want Bitcoin to $100 trillion, everything that I'm talking about, options trading, ETFs, banks, governments, all of these things have to come into our space for the liquidity. I better take a break. Sorry, bud.
I love that. It's also interesting when we look at that when we compound annual growth rates and calculate that. My mind is always like, especially if you take it 10, 20, 30 years, all those models, at some point they will break to the upside. Like at some point, either they make a new currency or the US dollars. I mean, it would be also interesting to see how it develops if they start now backing the US dollar with Bitcoin early enough that might preserve the value of the US dollar and prolonging his life. But if they don't do it, those models will just break to the upside.
It's funny, that you should bring that up because I realized thinking about it, I think when I said 40%, that actually comes out to like $43 million. If you use Michael Saylor's model and goes down to like 29% over that 20 years, but he's got it down at 20% for several years, just flatline. And I'm not sure that's correct. But let's just say you use his model, then it's like 13, 14 million. And I think he even puts that out. But yeah, you're right. You can't understand that. And even with the power law model, Giovanni Santastasi, the founder of that model, he acknowledges the fact that at some point the model will die. It has to. And when it does, I mean, I don't know where we're going then. Clueless.
I look at I had that with Stephen. I forgot his last name, but it's my second most famous video actually on the channel. And we talked about the power law and all those things around the power law. And one thing he brought up was the power law of Bitcoin, not in US dollar, but in gold. And I like that way more because when you have that, you get away with the US dollar just breaking away, because all people attack the power law because of the US dollar thing, because at some point, it will break. The US dollar, like most Bitcoiners believe that the US dollar will either completely go away or it will hyperinflate or they make something new out of it, or like something happens with that and it breaks to the upside. But gold will probably always have some sense of value, even though it will be demonetized by Bitcoin, but it will not completely vanish away. So you can better track the adoption rate of Bitcoin with the power law and not the inflation rate on top of that, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't seen that, but I'd love to take a look at that model. I'm glad you brought up gold because, again, getting back to some of the pushback against the SBR, including Bitcoin, which I strongly support this idea. But, when you look at gold and its history, it really is the world's first reserve global, well, not global, let's say the world's first reserve currency for like Florence with the florin and Venice with the Ducati or the Ducata and Ducat. And that was about a dime size gold coin that weighed 3.5 grams. It was pure gold. That thing spread like wildfire. Those two closely joined states, it went everywhere, all across the Middle East, the Levant, the Mediterranean, across Europe. But the world's, and it was stable for like almost 200 years until Napoleon came into Venice himself and took those beautiful statues home, the horses. It was stable and it worked for centuries. So gold works. And then the next real world's reserve currency that lasted again for centuries was the Spanish real, the Spanish silver dollar, Real de Ocho, which means pieces of eight. If you ever watch any pirate movies, you probably have thought of that, pieces of eight, and the gold escudo. And that was a gold-based system. Now, what's really weird is that Spain suffered a lot. Florence and Venice prospered, but Spain suffered under the gold standard. And the reason was because they discovered the New World and they'd have these galleons of gold and silver arrive. And when they did, they had massive inflation. They called it the price revolution. And they then began to export all their manufacturing outside of the country. And then they began to export their gold to bring in goods. And the wealth never transferred to the ordinary person. In fact, shop owners began to have their knees cut out from underneath them because they were being debased. And of course, what's really sad is that the Spanish government and the elites held most of the gold, and they used it to fund endless wars. So gold can be good or bad, just as Bitcoin can be good or bad. And I mentioned this story because when you think about it, it's kind of mirrors a little bit of what's happened to the United States ever since we became the world's reserve currency. And it's a kind of a sad state of affairs. For one thing, our endless wars. And I'm definitely tired of those personally.
Absolutely, yeah. If you look outside of the United States, there's a lot of hate towards that, and even inside of the United States, you see a lot of negative comments around that. I just want to put that in as an if people are interested in that also. Because it was such a popular video with Stephen, Paranoid. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's my favorite power law video that I made. It's also it was just a hit in general. My top 4 videos with Seyr, Gary Godone, and Max Kaiser, and he was just a really good also with that video. And there we talk, and this was the first time I ever heard about that gold model because Bitcoin grows because of 2 reasons. The first reason is adoption, more people getting into it and more people adopting it. And the second is inflation, because the underlying thing where we measure it, US dollar, is just debasing. If you take that debasing out, you have a better grasp of the adoption rate. And I like that power law way more than the US dollar one, because I'm not a fan in measuring something in US dollars, even though I acknowledge, and I put it in my thumbnails, I put it everywhere, because that's the thing people see. That's the thing that gets the people attention, and that's the thing most also talk about. It's like when we hit a new all-time high, Austrian mainstream TV, what are they talking about? It's the price and it's speculative. Those are the 2 things. And the speculative part is also price. So they only talk about the price, which is sad, but it's true.
Yeah, but it doesn't surprise me. I think price, I actually think price is very important. Price is driving a lot of the FOMO, and it drives a lot of the interest. It drives a lot of the adoption. I don't have any issues as far as discussing, or I look at the Bitcoin price. I'm interested in it. I think it tells me something about where we are in the cycles, and people are going to get, at some point, Robin, there's going to be a tipping point. I don't know where it is. I hope it's not $1 million a coin, but at some point, people are going to do FOMO when they see some of these price points. Maybe it's 400,000. And again, I mean, I could easily see that happening this next cycle. And so you've got to get as much Bitcoin as you can right now.
Absolutely. I talked with Rajat also, I think on the second one where he was on, that most people will still be sleeping on Bitcoin, even if it's like at $1 million, because a lot of the price appreciation comes from the big institutions, from the big players, and retail. When we talk about the mainstream, they will sleep a long time on that, which is a sad reality, because that's the crowd we kind of want to adopt it first. Like, my personal opinion is like, I don't want America to buy Bitcoin now. Like, I would love that Trump says like, that Bitcoin thing, let's not do it. Let's give the plebs more time to buy it. That would be probably long term better. It first of all gives me more time to buy. I'm young. I want more Bitcoin and not more US dollar value. But it also would have a longer time to have that grassroots movement in there. But it's organic growth anyways.
I just don't. I don't think I don't think we have much time left. I really don't. I had that conversation with you once before, and I mean, I think the train's leaving the station, and I think there's going to be a lot of people that are on that platform that we're going to leave behind. But again, to my fellow Bitcoiners and plebs out there, just get as much Bitcoin as you can. Understand how to self custody. Sometimes there are some people who are, like, I just had someone recently ask me about getting Bitcoin, and I really paused because you've got to understand risk. If you can't understand risk, you're not going to be able to understand Bitcoin. I'll tell you a funny story about risk, and I promise it won't be long. But when I was working underground, I was deep in the mine one night, and our shifter, the boss, came up to me and he said, "Hey, you, George." And Flash, he pointed at another guy's Flash, grab a rod, and I want you to go clean the roof. And what he's talking about there is, remember, we're in a tunnel, is he's talking about what you would call it the ceiling. What he wants us to do, and if you're 10,000 feet below the earth, the earth only wants to do one thing. It wants to fill that hole back in. So the rocks are always falling in there. And if it doesn't fill it with rocks, it fills it with water. It'll flood real quick. I mean, real fast. So we're down there, and what he wants us to do is he wants us to take a steel rod, and it's big. It's those rods you use to drill for dynamite holes, and they come in different sizes. A short little one might weigh 50 pounds. Longer ones are like 75, 80 pounds. And you walk down the tunnel for a long ways, and you're holding it out in front of you like this, poking at the ceiling, trying to knock rocks down. So it really is tiring. And, he's like Jethro. Flash was not the brightest guy down there in the mine. He was not a bright light down there. So he just, he thought, I don't feel like doing, I don't care. He just grabbed a short little rod, which means that as he's down there, he's got the rocks right over the top of his head just about while he's poking at him. And George, my risk tolerance, I knew what my risk tolerance was. And I grabbed a really long rod. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because it saved my life. As we're walking side by side and Flash is just kind of poking at the things, I came up to a section and I put my rod up there and I just touched the top of the tunnel. And when I did, a slab came down as big as a Volkswagen. I mean, right in front of me. It took that steel rod, smashed it out of my hands, bent it all to smithereens, and I actually felt the rock in front of my face come down. And I screamed like a little girl kind of down there in the mine. But the bottom line is, if you don't understand your risk tolerance, you're going to get hurt. And so I thought for a long time about this person that asked me, and I thought, well, what is her risk tolerance? What can she handle? And you know what I told her? I said, just buy the ETF. Just get the Bitcoin ETF. And I think that was all she could handle right then. And then I figure if she gets used to it, maybe I can get her into cold storage and a hardware wallet. And so, just get as much Bitcoin as you can right now. Store it in any way you can that's safe, where you're not going to make a mistake and lose it.
Absolutely. And I think that's an honest advice, because most Bitcoin get lost not because they get hacked or stolen.
Exactly.
They get lost because of user error. And that's the worst kind of losing it. If you get hacked or stolen, at least you can blame it on someone else.
Yeah.
A little bit. You can still blame yourself because you should have protected it better. But at least there's some sort of but if it's a pure user error, then it's like 100% your fault, and that's always the heartbreaking stories. And those are all over Twitter, like even in 2024, and they probably will come out in 2025 again. So these things happen. The latest one was, I think, some Ledger thing where he lost his backup and he put the pin 3 times wrong, and now it's gone. So those things happen. And if you don't know what you're doing, don't have it in self-custody. Educate yourself, and once you feel confident, then have it in self-custody.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the better way to do it. Yeah, really cool. We are already at 1.5 hours. Went by like crazy that time. I have one question.
Well, now wait a minute. Before you do that, I got something. Because remember, when you air this, we're going to be almost the time for President Trump to get inaugurated, right?
Oh, and let's celebrate.
Well, we're going to celebrate in just a minute here. So I'm going to pour myself a glass of whiskey here for those of you who are driving and not watching this. And it's a good whiskey. And then what I want to say before we end this is this. We are only days away from what I think will be the pardoning of Ross Ulbricht, that he's going to be released from prison. And we're going to see sunshine on his face, and he's going to get a tan. And I have written to his X account, Twitter, and I hope other people do. And I've told him, when I see your face in the sunshine when you're out of prison and you put up a QR code or whatever it is, and his family maintains his X account right now. When you hold up something, I've got some sats and I'm going to send them your way. And so I'd like us to, I hope we start this guy out on a really great path. And, that would be a really nice way to tell the authorities out there to basically go fuck yourself, giving him 2 life sentences back to back with no parole to spend his life in prison. As an example, he was made, as an example. So I'm going to give a toast. This is to you, Ross. I'm looking forward to seeing your face out there and getting a tan.
Here. I unfortunately don't have a whiskey, but I have water in a beer glass. Does this count?
Good enough.
Good enough.
All right. So what were you going to ask me, Robin?
I have, I think I did it last time also with you, the question that I asked each and one of my guests, what we can learn from you besides Bitcoin.
Well, let's go back to that. Let's go back to that buy, borrow, die dynasty. Let's go back to Fediment. Fediment gives you the power to become a guardian, and other people with just a cell phone and a QR code can enter your space, your little island that you've made. And in the future, if things kind of get nasty and, if it's a difficult world out there, just remember, Bitcoiners, that, you've got to hold on to your Bitcoin. Don't sell that Bitcoin. Don't do like these long-term holders, these idiots that sold in this last rally. Hold on to your Bitcoin and wait for a future day where you can become that guardian and you can pass this on to other people that you love, people that are, for your family. And every one of us out there, we've all tried to orange pill our family, and sometimes we come off like some nut. But the bottom line is we're doing it because we love people, and we see what's coming and we're just trying to help them. So if your friends, your family, if they're not listening to you, just build generational wealth so that sometime in the future, you're that person that people look up to, and do it, with all that wealth you create, do something good. I mean, whether it's, even if it's just mining, but do something good. We're going to have people this next cycle that are going to be very wealthy, and it's newfound wealth. So do something creative. Look at me right now. Look in this studio right now. Uh, do something with your time that's worthwhile and help other people. And that's all I got to say, I guess.
I love that message a lot. That's really cool. I love that. And I will just leave it at that. And we have end routine in the podcast, as you know, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. I think really exciting, because I think I don't know if you ever talked about that on any podcast. What benefits do you see coming from the Nostr protocol?
Oh, wow. Boy, that's a good question. I at the encouragement of Walker, mainly, I used Nostr about a year and a half ago, maybe a year. But I hate to say this, it was so clunky for me. For my enjoyment, I just didn't enjoy it. So what I would like to see is something that's less clunky, more user friendly, and I'd like to get on board with Nostr. And now I hate to say this, I already lost my damn key to it, so I'm going to have to start a new account. But I will. And I think, didn't you before I say that end this, didn't you also recently talk about this, or someone? There's a particular, is it Primal, that people are using now on
Yeah,
Nostr?
so like I also have a similar story actually. 1.5 years ago, I also went on Nostra. I also lost my keys, and I also had to start over. I think like 1 or 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Thankfully to my existing accounts, it just took like I think 3 days to get more followers than I had before in other ones. But Primal is really good. And I had the same feeling that it was clunky 1.5 years ago. And it feels way better now. Like I really love Primal, and for example, Dr. Jeff Ross, if you're familiar with him, he's also really popular. He's now only on Nostra. I mean, I recommend not to be only a Nostr, because we have to orange pill the world, and the world is not a Nostra. So I feel like we need the soldiers on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok and stuff.
I agree completely. So tag Jeff Ross and tell him that Jethro said, or George Bodine said, get your ass back to X, so that we can actually orange pill more people, because he's got a great message, but he needs to get it out on X too. And plus, that way I can DM him easily anytime I want to say hi.
Yeah, he actually said it. Since he went only on X, it is way harder to stay in touch with people. He's like because even if you're on, for example, for me, and I communicated with him, I look at Primal maybe once a week. So if he sends me a message, it might take like 5 days till I get back to him, because I just don't see it. On Twitter, it usually takes me not even like a day. Like I write back really fast, because I'm like 200 times on Twitter each day.
So the last thing I'll say is this then, regarding Nostr, make it for old boomers, old farts like me, that struggle sometimes with technology. Just make it easy so that we can get on there and start communicating and connect with our friends and networks and stuff. And then I'm all for it. I'm on board. I'll zap people. I mean, I got a great Lightning wallet. I'm ready to go.
Really cool. Perfect. Thank you so much, George, for being on my show. It was a great pleasure talking with you. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another. Oh, wait. Before I forget that, I forgot that also 2 episodes ago. Where can people find you and reach out to you? Sorry that I forgot that.
Well, you've got my name up there. If you just type my name in the internet, it always comes up. I'm actually the first thing in Google, so it's because of art and stuff. And if you go to X, that's the only social program, other than, hopefully I'm going to start in Nostr again now because of you. But just go there and type in Jethro. That used to be my call sign in the Navy, and it's JETHROE. And then because I'm a boomer, I just put 111 on the end of it. That's it.
Really cool. Perfect. Thank you so much. Reach out to George. It's always great to speak with him. Thank you so much, George, for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that's listening and watching for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Robin. Bye, bud.